The wind howled through the pines with a wild, almost human cry, shaking the old ranger cabin at Yellowstone's north entrance. Jessica Carter stood at the window, watching jagged bolts of lightning rip the night sky in half. At 36, with mud-caked boots and a gaze as sharp as any eagle's, Jessica was the kind of woman who fit this wilderness as if it were stitched into her bones. Her radio crackled again, the static nearly drowned by thunder. "Jess, you there?" came the anxious voice of Deputy Ray from the neighboring precinct. She pressed the mic to her lips, steady as always. "Go ahead, Ray." "We've got a report of wild Mustangs spooked near Devil's Ravine, just past the old service road. Someone said they heard screaming. Could be a hiker or a lost kid. Nobody's picked up a signal, but—" His words were swallowed by interference. Jessica didn't need more than that. Storm or not, she was out the door in seconds, grabbing her battered flashlight and a coil of rope. Driving the battered parked Jeep through sheets of rain, she gripped the wheel, every instinct taut. The Mustangs of Yellowstone were her legacy. Her father had protected them before her, and now each wild horse was a thread in the story of her life. But tonight felt different. The storm seemed to throb with warning. She pulled up to the service road, the headlights flickering on slanting rain and the narrow track disappearing into shadow. Lightning lit up the night in bursts, revealing the deep gouges in the land from last week's landslide. She followed the hoofprints, fresh, frantic, splashing through mud and debris, cursing under her breath as the storm battered her from every side. Then, over the roar of the wind, she heard it, a high, panicked whinny. Jessica's pulse kicked up. She sprinted toward the ravine, heart pounding, boots sliding dangerously near the edge. And there he was, a breathtaking Mustang stallion, his coat silvered by rain and streaked with mud, eyes wild and wide. He was circling the edge of the ravine, pawing at the sodden earth, nostrils flaring with urgency. "Easy, boy," Jessica called, voice barely carrying. The stallion, Guardian, she recognized, a legend among the herds for his fearlessness, didn't back away. Instead, he tossed his head, stamped, and let out a shrill cry, as if begging her to understand. Jessica's foot slipped, the mud gave way, and she dropped to one knee, peering over the edge. In the flicker of lightning, she saw the ground below, a broken tumble of boulders, twisted roots, and rising water. The landslide had carved out a deadly pit, one the horses must have narrowly escaped. But now, as she strained to see, another sound cut through the storm, a child's cry. It was faint, desperate, and it froze Jessica in place. She scanned the ravine, swinging her flashlight back and forth, searching for movement in the darkness. The rain was coming down harder, turning the ravine floor into a churning, muddy soup. "Help, please!" The voice, small and trembling, echoed up to her. Jessica's heart seized. "Hang on, I'm here," she called, fighting the rising panic in her chest. Her training kicked in. She snapped her radio to her belt. No signal, as expected. Cell service was out. Help was miles away, and the weather was only getting worse. She scrambled back to the Jeep for her climbing gear, every second stretching unbearably long. The stallion, Guardian, refused to leave, circling and snorting, his hooves sending clods of mud into the abyss. For a moment, Jessica met his eyes. There was a wild intelligence there, something ancient and fierce. She tossed the rope around the thickest pine she could find, checking knots with practiced hands. Lightning exploded above, illuminating the ravine in a harsh white glow. She could just make out a tiny figure below, huddled against the rocks. A girl, no more than 8 or 9. Her yellow raincoat torn and splattered with mud. Jessica steeled herself. The descent was treacherous, the ground slick and unstable. She eased herself down, muscles straining, boots searching for footholds in the shifting earth. Every time the thunder cracked, she feared the whole side of the ravine might collapse. But she forced herself onward, inch by inch, calling out encouragement as she went. "Don't move, sweetheart. I'm coming to get you. Just keep talking to me, okay?" There was a pause, then a shaky reply. "My name's Lily. My leg hurts. I can't—" Jessica's throat tightened, but she kept her voice calm, steady. "You're very brave, Lily. I'm almost there. Just look up at me. See my light?" The water at the bottom of the ravine was rising fast, dirty and cold. Jessica finally reached Lily, who was shivering, eyes wide with terror and pain. Jessica knelt beside her, sheltering the girl with her own body, assessing the injury. A nasty cut on her shin, maybe a sprain. "Hey, Lily, I've got you now," she whispered, wrapping her jacket around the trembling child. She reached for her first aid kit, working quickly, mind racing with calculations. The water was inching higher every minute. No signal, no way out but up, and only one rope. Above them, Guardian's silhouette loomed, pacing the edge, refusing to leave. A deafening crack. Jessica looked up to see a chunk of earth tumble down, splashing into the rising pool. She knew they had minutes, maybe less. Jessica's mind raced. She could try to climb out with Lily on her back, but if she slipped, both could fall. The rope might not hold their combined weight. She looked up again, locking eyes with Guardian. As if reading her thoughts, the stallion threw back his head and screamed into the night, a call that seemed to shatter the storm itself. Jessica made her decision. She would not leave Lily. She would not give up. Above them, in the wildest storm Yellowstone had seen in years, a wild Mustang stood guard. Proof that tonight, the fate of 3 lives hung by a single thread. The storm showed no mercy. Sheets of rain hammered down relentlessly, turning the forest floor into a slick, treacherous mess. Jessica Carter tightened her grip on the rope coiled in her hands, eyes fixed on the jagged edge of Devil's Ravine. Lightning fractured the sky above, briefly illuminating the chaotic scene below. A small figure huddled among rocks, with water rapidly rising around her. Guardian, the silver stallion, pawed and snorted anxiously at the precipice. His eyes were fixed on the tiny form trapped beneath, his urgency palpable. Jessica's heart pounded as she prepared to descend. The ground beneath her feet was slippery, and the wind threatened to knock her off balance. Every instinct screamed caution, but every ounce of her determination pushed her forward. "Hold on, Lily," Jessica called down, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. The girl's voice trembled back up, barely audible. "I'm coming. Just stay awake." Carefully, Jessica secured the rope around a sturdy tree and began her descent, each foothold precarious, each step weighted with the risk of plunging into the ravine herself. The muscles in her arms and legs burned as she lowered herself down, the rain soaking her through, mingling with sweat and adrenaline. Guardian watched intently from above, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos. Finally, she reached Lily. The girl was pale, soaked, and trembling violently, but conscious. Her small leg was twisted unnaturally, blood mingling with mud. Jessica's breath caught as she took in the sight. The child's frightened eyes locked on hers, pleading silently. "I've got you," Jessica whispered, wrapping her jacket tightly around Lily to shield her from the cold. She quickly assessed the injury, pressing a clean cloth to the bleeding wound. "We're going to get out of here, I promise. The water was rising fast, cold and ominous. Jessica's mind raced. The ravine was flooding, and if she didn't act quickly, they'd both be trapped. She reached for her radio, nothing but static, no signal. Rescue was miles away, and the storm was cutting off all communication. Then, from the distance, came the faintest sound, a whinny, sharp, and urgent. Guardian's call echoed against the rocky walls of the ravine, a beacon of hope. Jessica looked up, eyes scanning the dark forest edge. The stallion had turned and was galloping away, disappearing into the sheets of rain. Seconds later, torchlights flickered through the trees. A search and rescue team had arrived, drawn by Guardian's persistent calls. The stallion had guided them, refusing to leave until help was near. With coordinated effort, the rescuers lowered ropes and secured harnesses. Jessica and the team worked together to lift Lily safely up the treacherous cliff, each movement careful but swift. When it was Jessica's turn, she felt the strain of exhaustion but was buoyed by the presence of the team and just above, Guardian's watchful eyes. At the top, Lily was enveloped in warm blankets, her sobs mingling with relief and disbelief. Jessica knelt beside her, wrapping an arm protectively around the child. Guardian approached cautiously, allowing the rescuers and Jessica to touch him. It was an extraordinary moment, a wild Mustang bridging the gap between nature and humanity, an unspoken acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. The storm began to abate, the first rays of dawn piercing through the clouds. Jessica looked at Guardian and Lily, the two lives she'd fought to save, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. This was more than a rescue. It was a testament to the bond between human and wild, a reminder that sometimes, in the darkest moments, hope rides in on the most unexpected friends. The sun finally crested the horizon after what felt like the longest night of Jessica Carter's career. Yellowstone glistened under a pale post-storm light, the air thick with the scent of wet pine and churned earth. At the ranger station, Jessica sat by Lily's bedside, watching the young girl sleep soundly for the first time since her rescue. The medical team had patched up Lily's leg, cleaned the cuts on her arms, and wrapped her in warm blankets. When she finally woke, it was to a cup of hot chocolate, a box of crayons, and Jessica sitting quietly nearby. There was an unspoken connection between them, a fragile, shared memory of mud, fear, and courage under lightning-lashed skies. Lily's parents, pale and haggard from worry, had arrived at dawn, voices trembling as they thanked Jessica, tears streaming down their faces as they gathered Lily into a tight embrace. "We thought we'd lost her. Thank you. Thank you," Lily's mother kept repeating, as if words could ever capture the depth of her gratitude. The storm's chaos was slowly being replaced by a quieter, steadier rhythm. Jessica, running on coffee and stubbornness, threw herself into the paperwork, the incident reports, and the endless phone calls that came with every dramatic rescue in the park. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment in the ravine, the wild eyes of Guardian, the Mustang's unyielding presence, and that impossible sense of communication that had passed between them. The story spread like wildfire. By noon, the local paper had dubbed Guardian the Miracle Mustang, with Jessica as the fearless ranger who had risked her life for a child. TV crews arrived, muddy vans trailing cables through the ranger station's parking lot. They filmed Guardian from afar, his silver mane flashing as he led his herd through the grasslands near Devil's Ravine. Reporters clamored for interviews, but Jessica kept her answers short, deflecting praise to her team and the horse who, in her words, just refused to give up on us. She tried to explain what she'd seen, The deliberate way Guardian had led the rescuers, his stubborn refusal to leave the edge of that ravine, the eerie sense that he'd understood what was at stake. Some people nodded along, others raised their eyebrows. Jessica herself didn't have all the answers. That afternoon, Lily sat at a small desk in the Ranger's Lounge, crayons scattered everywhere. She drew picture after picture. Jessica in her ranger uniform, Guardian rearing at the edge of the ravine, herself in her yellow raincoat, clutching Jessica's hand. Each drawing was more vibrant than the last, filled with storm clouds and flashes of color. She taped them to the wall beside her bed, a mural of survival. Jessica watched Lily, feeling something soften inside her. She'd spent years scoffing at stories of animal intelligence, quietly rolling her eyes at tales of miraculous rescues or psychic connections. But the memory of Guardian's eyes, so alert, so full of purpose, lingered in her thoughts. Had she misjudged the wild creatures she spent her life protecting? Could there be more to their instincts, their choices, than she'd ever understood? After lunch, a parade of locals arrived. Some brought baskets of food or homemade thank you cards. Others just came to shake Jessica's hand, eyes shining with pride and relief. The rescue had touched something deep in the community, a reminder that, even in a world growing more complicated by the day, courage and compassion still mattered. One older rancher leaned against the doorframe, hat in hand. "Heard about that Mustang," he said, nodding toward the fields beyond the station. "Used to think wild horses were just a nuisance. But now, well, maybe we all got a thing or two to learn, huh?" Jessica smiled, feeling a reluctant grin tug at the corners of her mouth. "Yeah, maybe we do." As the day wound down, she slipped away to the observation window, binoculars in hand. She scanned the meadows until she found Guardian, grazing quietly among his herd. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met across the distance. No words, no explanation, just a quiet recognition. That evening, Lily joined Jessica on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. They watched the last rays of sunlight filter through the clouds, painting the park in gold and silver. "Will I see Guardian again?" Lily asked, voice hopeful but uncertain. Jessica looked at the sprawling wilderness, the endless sky, the place where wild horses vanished into dusk. "I think you already carry a part of him with you," she replied, a gentle smile in her voice. "But who knows? Out here, anything's possible." Lily nodded, tracing a finger over her drawings. "I hope he knows I'm thankful," she said softly. Jessica ruffled her hair, a quiet, steady warmth blooming in her chest. "I think he does, Lily. I really do." Night fell, but the ranger station glowed with a quiet, steadfast light. Outside in the whispering grasses, Guardian stood watch, his story and theirs just beginning to ripple through the lives of everyone touched by that stormy night. And for the first time in years, Jessica Carter allowed herself to believe in miracles, both wild and human, both seen and unseen. In the weeks that followed, the storm became a memory, one retold over campfires and coffee cups, in news clippings taped to fridges across Montana, and in the gentle way Lily hugged Jessica every time their paths crossed at the ranger station. Yellowstone was always changing, seasons spinning by in bursts of green and gold, but Jessica Carter found herself lingering in places she'd once rushed past, looking for something she hadn't realized she was missing. Every few days, Jessica hiked out to Devil's Ravine, rain or shine, a habit she told no one about. She brought apples and carrots, leaving them in the tall grass just out of sight, watching from behind a thicket or boulder as Guardian and his herd wandered near. Guardian never approached her directly, but she often caught him watching, ears pricked, head high, as if weighing her intentions. Sometimes the wild stallion let the other horses feed on her offerings, a few mares and younger colts nosing around for treats. But Guardian kept his distance, wary and regal, a living legend growing ever larger in the stories that now echoed through town. Jessica respected his space, careful never to crowd him, her presence quiet, almost reverent. She started keeping a journal again, something she hadn't done since her early days as a rookie ranger. Page after page filled with reflections. The way Guardian's coat shimmered in the early morning light, the ripple of his muscles as he led his herd, the steady, watchful intelligence she could no longer dismiss as mere instinct. She wrote about Lily, too, her recovery, her laughter, the way she'd started to ask about everything from the park's geology to the secret lives of wild animals. Jessica's entries grew longer, more honest, as she tried to make sense of what had changed in her. There was a humility now, a sense that she was part of something much older and grander than her own experience. She wrote about the narrow gap between trust and wildness, and about the silent bargains made every day between people and the natural world. It was Lily's parents who inspired the next step. Still deeply grateful, they joined Jessica for a walk along the rim of the ravine one cool Saturday morning. They'd brought thermoses of coffee and stacks of homemade flyers, their energy infectious. "We want to do something," Lily's mother explained, handing Jessica a flyer. "Maybe a school program, a fundraiser, anything to help keep kids safe and spread the word about the wild horses. They're part of this place now, just like the rest of us." Jessica studied the flyer, which showed a child's drawing of Guardian and the words, "Protect Yellowstone's Mustangs. For the future." Lily's father nodded. "We owe that stallion everything. And you. It's time people understood what's at stake out here." Their enthusiasm sparked something in Jessica. She helped them organize a town hall, rallying fellow rangers, local business owners, even the skeptical ranchers who'd once viewed the Mustangs as a nuisance. She spoke quietly but firmly about the night of the rescue, how Guardian's actions had saved a child's life, how the balance between wilderness and safety was more delicate than anyone cared to admit. The response surprised her. People volunteered for patrols, donated to new trail signs, and offered supplies for ranger training. Local teachers asked Jessica to speak to their classes, her presence at the front of crowded classrooms drawing rapt attention from children eager to hear the story straight from the hero herself. Lily became a fixture at these talks, always with her drawings in hand. Sometimes she would stand beside Jessica, her small voice adding details only a child could see, like how Guardian's eyes shined with moonlight, or how the storm felt less scary when someone was brave. Her innocence reminded everyone, especially Jessica, why the work mattered. Guardian and his herd became a symbol of hope. Park visitors asked about him by name, scanning the hills for his silver mane. Rangers shared sightings over the radio, Guardians down by the old creek, or saw him at sunrise watching the West Trail. It was as if the Mustang had become a silent guardian over the park's visitors, his story a living thread running through every campfire tale and ranger-led hike. Some days, Jessica simply sat on a rock overlooking the plains, letting the wind tangle her hair, her gaze drifting over the undulating grass. She didn't always spot Guardian, but she felt his presence, a steady reminder that the boundary between human and wild was thinner than she'd ever believed. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in orange and lavender, Jessica saw Guardian standing on a distant rise. The herd grazed behind him, shadows stretching long. For a moment, the stallion turned toward her, and in the hush that followed, Jessica felt a quiet, wordless gratitude pass between them. Back at the station, she finished a journal entry with a single line. Maybe we're not here to conquer nature, but to learn from it, one act of trust at a time. Jessica's life, once measured by routine and rules, had become something richer, softer around the edges. She felt it every time she watched Lily race down the trail or heard Guardian's distant whinny on the wind. Yellowstone had always been beautiful, but now, in this gentle, reflective season, it felt alive in new ways, connected by bonds of compassion, courage, and the silent promise that humans and wild creatures could share a world, if only they learned to listen. And every so often, when dusk settled softly over the land, Jessica would look to the horizon and think, Guardian is still out there, watching just as I am. Maybe that's what it means to truly belong. Summer in Yellowstone brought a restless energy, the kind that hummed under every breath of wind and in the calls of the wild. The park was alive. Tourists flooded the trails, wildlife roamed freely, and the Mustang herds, led by the now legendary Guardian, became a near-daily sight on the sprawling plains. For Jessica Carter, this season was always a test of patience and vigilance, but this year, an uneasy feeling clung to her steps. One muggy afternoon, a rumor began to ripple through the ranger station like a chill draft. Ranger Mike, grizzled and usually unfazed, tossed his hat on the radio console and spoke quietly. There's talk in the valley. Somebody's been setting illegal snares. Couple of hikers saw men in camo, carrying gear that wasn't for camping. Jessica's jaw tensed. Where? East of Dead Horse Gulch, he said. Right on the edge of Guardian's territory. Jessica's first instinct was disbelief. Who would be bold enough to set traps in the heart of Yellowstone, with the park crawling with rangers, cameras, and animal lovers from across the country? But the look in Mike's eyes told her this was no rumor. The poaching threat was real. That evening, Jessica walked the perimeter of Guardian's known range. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of pine and dust. As dusk deepened, she found what she feared, a snare, half buried in tall grass, its wire twisted tight and stained with rust. Her hands trembled as she snapped photos, bagged the evidence, and scanned the area for more. She found 2 additional snares, one dangerously close to the main herd's watering hole. A cold fury rose in her chest. Tracks in the mud told a troubling story. Heavy boots, several men, moving with purpose. She knelt, studying the prints. They were fresh. Back at the station, she called a late-night meeting with her team. The air was tense as she relayed what she'd found. This isn't just some desperate hunter, Jessica said. These are professionals. They're after the Mustangs, maybe for meat, maybe for illegal trade, but definitely for profit. The park's administration was slow to act. Bureaucratic wheels turned painfully slow, and by the time the decision-makers agreed to increase patrols, Jessica knew the poachers would already be adapting. Frustrated but undeterred, she took matters into her own hands. Jessica rallied a team of trusted rangers, Mike, Sarah, and a pair of seasoned volunteers named Abe and Carmen, people she knew would act with urgency and discretion. They set up a schedule to monitor the herd, rotating night patrols and reporting every movement. Jessica spent her nights hidden in the shadows near the herd's favorite grazing grounds, eyes peeled for any sign of danger. Meanwhile, the stormy night rescue had changed Lily in subtle but profound ways. Now healed, She'd become fiercely interested in the Mustangs, reading every book she could find and peppering Jessica with questions on ranger visits. Her school project, a heartfelt essay about Guardian and her ordeal, gained traction far beyond their small community. Lily's teachers submitted it to a national contest. To everyone's surprise, Lily's words struck a nerve. Soon, her story was picked up by a major news outlet. Photos of Lily, Jessica, and the iconic stallion, taken by tourists and rangers alike, flashed across social media. The story became a rallying cry: "Protect Yellowstone's wild Mustangs." Suddenly, national attention turned toward the quiet valley. Reporters called for interviews. Donations for Mustang protection and park safety poured in from across the country. While the attention brought new hope and much-needed resources, it also put pressure on the poachers, who realized their window was closing. One sticky night, Jessica crouched under a twisted juniper, binoculars pressed to her face, sweat trickling down her back. In the moonlight, she saw movement near the creek, too quiet, too careful to be a hiker or camper. 3 figures, faces masked, slipped between the shadows, heading straight for the herd. Jessica's heart hammered in her chest. She tapped her radio, whispering coordinates to Mike and Sarah, who were stationed nearby. The plan was to observe, collect evidence, and avoid confrontation unless absolutely necessary. But as the poachers set up fresh bait and checked their snares, Guardian's keen eyes picked up the danger. The stallion reared, letting out a shrill alarm that startled the poachers and sent the herd thundering away from the trap. Jessica's adrenaline spiked. She watched as Guardian placed himself between the poachers and his family, hooves pawing the ground defiantly. Jessica's team moved in, flashlights snapping on, voices ringing out in the night. "Park rangers, drop your gear!" The poachers scattered, vanishing into the dark with a practiced swiftness that spoke of experience. Jessica and her team quickly dismantled the traps, checking the area for injured animals. Fortunately, this time, the herd had escaped unharmed, thanks to Guardian's vigilance and the rangers' quick response. As dawn crept over the horizon, Jessica stood watch over the herd, exhaustion weighing on her, but relief flooding her chest. She felt the electric bond between herself and Guardian. 2 guardians, different worlds, fighting for the same future. The threat had not disappeared, but now Jessica knew she wasn't alone. The park's wildest protector had allies, both human and Mustang, and their bond would be tested again in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Somewhere in the tall grass, Guardian lifted his head and met Jessica's gaze. For a moment, everything was silent except for the steady beat of hope and defiance. The battle for the wild was far from over, but together they had survived the night. And for Jessica, that was enough to keep fighting, one sunrise at a time. Night in Yellowstone had a way of swallowing sound and light, draping the world in a velvet hush that was both beautiful and unsettling. Jessica Carter crouched in the underbrush, her back pressed against a cold granite boulder, her eyes fixed on the open plain. The air vibrated with tension. Above her, a sliver of moon cut through wispy clouds, lending a ghostly glow to the wild grass and scattered rocks. Somewhere out there, the Mustangs were moving. Jessica could feel it in her bones, the herd shifting nervously as if they too sensed something was wrong. She glanced at her watch. 1:17 a.m., the hours since dusk had blurred together. Quick meals of cold sandwiches, whispered radio check-ins with Mike and Sarah, the steady hum of adrenaline in her veins. Poachers had been spotted 2 nights ago, their tracks weaving dangerously close to Guardian's herd. The snares Jessica's team had found were only the beginning. Word in the ranger community was that these weren't amateur hunters. They were organized, equipped, and desperate, with every reason to slip through the cracks of law and conscience. The evening's silence shattered as a series of soft, clipped whinnies echoed through the valley. Jessica's body went rigid. Guardian. She knew his voice by now. Sharp, commanding, a clarion call that sent the other Mustangs racing to attention. She lifted her binoculars and scanned the clearing. The herd bunched together, ears flicking, hooves stamping in agitation. Guardian stood out in the moonlight, mane flying as he pawed the earth and bellowed another warning. Jessica caught a flash of movement. 3 dark figures skulking at the tree line, moving low and deliberate, their faces masked and bodies draped in camouflage. They tossed something to the ground. Bait. A sack of grain and apples, an irresistible lure for hungry horses. Jessica's heart thudded. She tapped her radio twice, the agreed-upon signal. Poachers sighted. Hold position. She watched as the poachers unfurled a mesh net, spreading it low across the grass. Nearby, Guardian snorted, nostrils flaring. He knew something was wrong. His body tensed, muscles coiled like springs. The herd inched forward, curiosity battling with instinct. One of the younger mares, a yearling named Willow, her coat a pale dun, moved toward the bait, her hunger overriding caution. In a flash, the poachers yanked the net, tangling Willow's legs and sending her sprawling. The herd erupted into chaos, hooves thundering, cries ringing out. Guardian whirled, charging the poachers, teeth bared and eyes blazing. Jessica sprang from her hiding place, sprinting toward the scene. Her team converged from all sides, radios crackling. "Move in! Now!" Jessica shouted, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. Guardian launched himself between Willow and the poachers, forcing them to retreat. But one poacher circled behind, brandishing a tranquilizer dart. Jessica dove, tackling him from behind, the dart clattering harmlessly to the ground. They wrestled in the dirt, breath coming in ragged gasps, until Mike arrived and cuffed the man with swift efficiency. Sarah rushed to Willow's side, gently untangling the net. The mare thrashed, wild-eyed, but Guardian hovered nearby, his presence enough to keep her from panicking. Jessica took stock. 1 poacher down, 2 others fleeing into the woods, the rest of the herd scattered but unhurt. The whole confrontation had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. As Jessica caught her breath, she realized Guardian had done more than just protect his herd. He had coordinated with her team, his warnings perfectly timed, his charges creating just enough chaos for the Rangers to act. She exchanged a look with Sarah, both women awed by the stallion's intelligence. They hauled the captured poacher to the ranger station, booking him on a long list of charges. But Jessica's mind was still in the field, replaying the events, searching for lessons. She and her team reviewed their tactics, adjusting patrols and communications, determined to be even faster next time. Later that night, Jessica returned to the herd. Willow grazed quietly, the last traces of panic fading from her eyes. Guardian approached Jessica, stopping just short of arm's reach. He lowered his head, nostrils twitching, and let out a soft, breathy whicker. Jessica smiled, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she meant it for the horse, her team, or the wild land itself. The days that followed were a blur of activity. News of the attempted poaching spread quickly, and local law enforcement doubled their patrols. Jessica's phone rang non-stop. Park officials, animal rights groups, journalists all wanted updates on the Mustangs, the Rangers, and the battle for Yellowstone's soul. Lily, never far from the heart of things, wrote an open letter to a national newspaper. In it, she described the rescue, Guardian's heroism, and the need to protect wild horses everywhere. Her words, simple and true, struck a chord with thousands. Meanwhile, Jessica devoted herself to the herd. She watched Guardian teach the younger horses to avoid human traps, driving them away from suspicious smells and unusual objects. She saw him stand watch at night, always vigilant, always ready to defend his family. With the support of her team and the growing national attention, Jessica organized a round-the-clock surveillance plan. Trail cameras were installed, drones were flown overhead, and community volunteers joined the effort, patrolling the park's most vulnerable areas. It was exhausting work, but it brought the team and the community closer together. Over campfires and early morning coffee, Jessica found herself sharing stories with people she'd barely known before, united now by a common cause. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Jessica sat on a hillside overlooking the plains. Guardian stood nearby, mane rippling in the wind, the herd grazing peacefully around him. She felt a deep sense of connection, a bond that stretched beyond words, built on trust, respect, and the fierce will to protect. She knew the fight wasn't over. The poachers would return, drawn by greed and desperation. But so would the rangers, the volunteers, and the wild spirit embodied by Guardian. For the first time in a long while, Jessica believed they could win, not just for the Mustangs, but for all that was wild and untamed in the world. And as darkness settled over Yellowstone, she made a silent promise. Whatever comes, we stand together, human and horse, guardians of the land. The rising heat of late summer seemed to draw out both the beauty and the dangers of Yellowstone. The meadows buzzed with life, tourists filled the viewing platforms, and the rangers worked around the clock. But beneath the cheerful surface, a shadow stretched across the land, one that even the bravest animals and most vigilant rangers could not ignore. It was early evening when Jessica Carter set out alone, the kind of dusk where gold spilled over the mountains and the grasslands glowed. She walked the perimeter of Guardian's Range, her boots crunching softly over dry earth, her mind restless. Despite all the increased patrols, despite national attention and new surveillance equipment, something in her gut said the fight wasn't finished. Jessica moved quietly, her radio clipped to her belt, her senses on high alert. She paused at the edge of a shallow ravine, watching the Mustang herd drift toward water. Guardian stood at the front, proud and unbowed, his coat shining in the fading sun. The younger horses clustered close, learning from his every move. Jessica felt a swell of pride, and then a sudden prickle of unease. A branch snapped behind her. Before she could turn, rough hands grabbed her arms. She struggled, instinct and muscle memory kicking in, but she was outnumbered and forced to her knees. 3 men loomed above her, faces half covered, eyes cold and determined. One pressed a pistol to her side. "Don't try anything," the man hissed, his grip tightening. "You make a sound, and you'll regret it." Jessica's mind raced. Her radio was pinned beneath her, useless. She scanned the horizon for any sign of her team. Nothing. The herd had startled and bunched together, Guardian stamping and tossing his head at the disturbance. "We warned you Rangers to stay out of our business," the leader said, pulling Jessica to her feet and shoving her toward a stand of trees. "You cost us a lot of money last time. You and that freak horse." Jessica bit back a retort, forcing herself to stay calm. She glanced sideways. Guardian was watching, tense as a drawn bow. The stallion let out a shrill cry, echoing through the valley. The poachers laughed. Even your horse can't save you now. The ringleader waved to the others, who circled around Jessica, guns drawn. We'll take care of you. Then we'll take care of the herd. That's the price for interfering. Jessica steadied her breath. She'd spent her life facing down storms and wild animals, but this, being cornered by men driven by greed and cruelty, felt different, colder. Still, she refused to show fear. You can threaten me all you want, she said, voice low. But the law's coming. People are watching. The leader sneered. Not tonight, they aren't. Suddenly, a wild commotion erupted. Guardian, sensing Jessica's distress, had rallied the entire herd. With a unified burst of speed, dozens of Mustangs charged down the slope, their hooves pounding like thunder. The poachers spun in surprise, two firing wild shots into the air. Horses swerved, but Guardian pressed forward, eyes blazing. Jessica seized her chance. In the chaos, she twisted free and rolled behind a fallen log, clawing for her radio. She hit the emergency button, sending out a distress signal. One poacher lunged after her, but was knocked aside by Guardian, who reared and struck out with his hooves. The herd surrounded the poachers, swirling in a cyclone of muscle and noise. Jessica ducked and crawled through the grass, managing to get clear of the immediate danger. She saw one of the men level his gun at Guardian. No! Jessica shouted, scrambling to her feet. The shot rang out, echoing across the valley. Guardian jerked but didn't fall. He was grazed along his flank, blood darkening his silver coat. Instead of retreating, the stallion roared with fury, charging at the poacher and scattering the attackers. Jessica fumbled for her flare gun and fired into the air, a bright arc of red streaking above the chaos. Within minutes, the backup rangers she'd called for began pouring into the meadow, their lights slicing through the dusk. The poachers tried to flee, but Guardian and the herd blocked their path, forcing them back toward the waiting rangers. Guns were confiscated, handcuffs snapped shut, and the poachers' faces fell as they realized they'd lost. Not just to law enforcement, but to the wild horses themselves. It was over in less than 10 minutes, but the memory would last a lifetime. Jessica ran to Guardian's side, her hands shaking as she assessed the wound. It was bleeding, but not deep. A flesh wound, thanks to the stallion's quick reflexes and luck. She spoke to him softly. Easy, big guy, I'm here, as rangers moved around her, tending to the captured poachers and calming the terrified horses. The entire incident had been recorded by a tourist with a phone and by one of the new trail cameras set up just days earlier. By sunrise, video of the Mustang herd rescuing a park ranger was spreading across the country, turning Guardian and Jessica into national symbols of courage and resilience. Reporters descended again. News anchors praised the wild horses' remarkable intelligence. Social media overflowed with calls for greater protection of Yellowstone's wildlife. Guardian trended for days, his legend growing with every retelling. Jessica, exhausted but relieved, sat with Guardian in the early morning light. She cleaned and bandaged his wound, tears prickling at her eyes, not just for the pain he'd suffered, but for the unspoken bond that had saved both their lives. He let her touch his muzzle, resting his head briefly against her shoulder, a rare, almost sacred moment of trust. We did it, Jessica whispered, stroking his mane. We stood our ground, together. That day, the world saw the true meaning of guardianship, not just in laws or badges, but in the courage to stand together when the wild called for help. And in that golden hour, with Guardian at her side and her team rallying around, Jessica understood. Their fight was far from over, but they had already changed the park, and themselves, forever. The aftermath of the showdown rippled through Yellowstone and far beyond. For days, the park buzzed with reporters, rangers, visitors, and volunteers, all abuzz with stories of the hero Mustang and the fearless ranger who'd faced down poachers with nothing but her wits, courage, and the loyalty of a wild stallion. News vans lined the park's main road. Drones hovered overhead, hoping to catch a glimpse of Guardian and his herd. Even the oldest rangers admitted they'd never seen anything like it. Jessica Carter found herself at the center of it all. But her mind wasn't on interviews or fame. Every morning at dawn, she'd slip away from the crowd, following the hoof prints through dew-damp grass to the quiet stretch of meadow where Guardian grazed. The stallion's wound, a red, angry slash across his flank, needed tending, and Jessica approached with the same gentle care she reserved for the park's most delicate rescues. She kept her distance at first, kneeling several yards away, quietly setting out a shallow bowl of water and a bundle of clean gauze and ointment. The first time, Guardian eyed her warily, stamping the ground and snorting. But he didn't bolt. He seemed to sense that she was there to help, not to trap or control. It became a ritual, Jessica moving slowly, talking to him in a low, steady voice, explaining what she was doing as if he understood every word. "You're not just a hero, you know. You're a legend," she'd say, cleaning his wound as he flinched but stayed. Over days, the cut closed, pink and healthy. Soon, Guardian tolerated her touch, and sometimes, on misty mornings, he let her run her hand down his neck, feeling the heat and strength of a creature as wild as the land itself. The bond between human and horse deepened, and word spread among the rangers and townsfolk. For the first time, the park administration agreed to establish a new, larger protected zone for the Mustangs, using Guardian's fame as a catalyst for change. Fences were pushed back, trails rerouted, and warning signs installed at every trailhead. Wildlife first, respect their space. Conservationists and biologists from around the country wrote articles, started studies, and flooded Yellowstone with support. Lily, now something of a local celebrity herself, threw her heart into Mustang protection. Her story, her letter, her drawings, her awe for Guardian, became the centerpiece of a national fundraiser for wild horse protection and youth wilderness education. Donations arrived from every corner of the country, enough to buy new camera equipment, sponsor school trips, and host workshops for kids in the region. The first Mustang Day brought together school buses, journalists, and tourists. Jessica led children along the perimeter of Guardian's range, teaching them how to spot wild horse tracks, explaining the delicate balance between safety and freedom, and reminding them never to approach the Mustangs too closely. "Guardian keeps his family safe by keeping his distance," she told them. "And we respect that by watching, not chasing." Lily spoke shyly at the event, her voice steady. "When I was scared in the ravine, Guardian didn't leave. He was brave for me, so we have to be brave for him. We have to take care of the wild." That afternoon, as a cool breeze swept over the hills, Jessica saw a shift among the children, and even the adults. They watched Guardian and his herd from afar, binoculars trained, voices hushed with reverence. A group of local teenagers, once prone to cutting across the fields on dirt bikes, stood together and promised to volunteer for the new Mustang Watch program. For Jessica, the months that followed brought a personal transformation. She'd always believed in science, logic, and careful planning, but Guardian and his herd had shown her something deeper. Animal emotion, intelligence, and even a kind of partnership she'd never dared to imagine. She began speaking out, not just about protecting land or species, but about recognizing animals as sentient partners in conservation. Her words found their way into park policies, funding requests, and eventually a national symposium on wildlife management. Jessica's days were longer, busier, but also brighter. She took to the backcountry as often as she could, learning the subtle language of the herds, how Guardian would position himself between danger and his mares, how the young colts mimicked his posture, how the older mares nickered softly to calm the anxious. She wrote articles, shared insights at conferences, and advocated for the inclusion of animal behavior studies in ranger training. Guardian's wound healed with time, the silver of his coat interrupted only by a faint scar, a mark of battle, of sacrifice, of the bond between wildness and the people willing to protect it. The herd grew stronger, bolder, often venturing close to the new protected zone's boundaries, as if understanding that their safety had multiplied. In the evenings, Jessica sometimes found herself sitting on the hill overlooking the valley, Lily beside her, both quiet as they watched the Mustangs graze. "Do you think Guardian knows how many people love him now?" Lily would ask, her eyes full of hope. Jessica smiled, squeezing the girl's shoulder. "I think he knows he's finally understood, and that's worth more than anything else." News of Yellowstone's success inspired parks and reserves around the country. Other wild herds were granted more land. Rangers shared Jessica's model for community engagement and animal partnership. Lily's drawings hung in classrooms from Montana to Maine, a reminder that one child, one horse, and one determined ranger could spark a movement. Jessica, who once scoffed at the idea of animal heroes, now became one of their loudest advocates. "Conservation isn't just about protecting animals from people," she'd say in interviews. "It's about learning from them. Guardian taught me that real bravery is trusting, against all odds, that together we can make something wild last forever." And so, as another summer faded to gold and the world spun on, Guardian and his herd remained wild, watched over not just by one ranger, but by a whole generation, children and adults, city dwellers and ranchers, who had found in their story a lesson about hope, healing, and the power of release. The story of Jessica Carter and Guardian the Mustang had transcended the boundaries of Yellowstone, evolving into a powerful symbol of empathy, courage, and interspecies partnership. Across the country, classrooms, community centers, and wildlife organizations found inspiration in the tale of a wild stallion and the ranger who trusted him. It was more than a story about rescue. It became a lesson about respect, stewardship, and the unspoken bonds that tie humans to the natural world. Jessica found herself at the heart of this movement. Invitations poured in, from schools eager for her to speak, to conservation conferences that wanted her perspective on the future of wildlife protection. But it wasn't the accolades that drove her. It was the chance to reach young minds, to plant seeds of understanding and compassion. On a crisp fall morning, Jessica stood before a group of wide-eyed middle schoolers at a local school just outside the park. The children were buzzing with questions, their notebooks ready, some clutching stuffed horses or drawings of wild herds. She began softly. "The story of Guardian isn't just about a horse saving a girl or a ranger fighting poachers. It's about courage. Courage to trust, to protect, and to listen. Guardian taught me that bravery isn't just for humans. It lives in every creature who fights to keep their family safe." A hand shot up. "How did you know Guardian was helping you?" Jessica smiled, memories flickering. "At first I thought it was luck, but the more I watched him, the more I realized he understood us. He responded to our calls, guided the rescuers, and stood between danger and the herd. That took intelligence and heart. Over the months, Jessica led guided tours with school groups, using the story of Guardian to teach children about ecosystems, animal behavior, and the importance of coexistence. She showed them footprints, explained the subtle cues of wild horses, and taught respect for the fragile balance between human curiosity and animal freedom. Guardian's story inspired curriculum changes in nearby schools. Teachers incorporated lessons about empathy for animals, conservation ethics, and wilderness survival skills. Jessica's talks stressed humility, the idea that humans are not masters of nature but participants in its ongoing story. Meanwhile, the park's Guardians Day became an annual event celebrated with music, storytelling, and community cleanups. Local artists painted murals of Guardian and his herd. Youth groups performed plays reenacting the rescue. It was a day to honor not just a horse, but the idea that every life, human or wild, deserves protection and kindness. Jessica also became an advocate for integrating animal emotions and intelligence into wildlife management policies. At national forums, she argued for ranger training that included behavioral studies and for park policies that recognized the sentience of animals like Mustangs. She stressed that true stewardship required more than fences and fines. It required listening, understanding, and building trust. One poignant moment came when a documentary crew followed Jessica and Lily for several weeks, capturing the quiet moments of connection between human and horse. The film aired on public television, sparking conversations about empathy, conservation, and the complexities of wildness. Lily, now a teenager, had grown into a passionate wildlife student, her experiences shaping her future ambitions. She often joined Jessica on tours, sharing her own insights with younger kids. Guardian taught me that bravery isn't just facing danger, she told a group once. It's about standing up for those who can't speak for themselves. The ripple effect was clear. Across the nation, groups formed to protect wild horses and other vulnerable species, inspired by the partnership between Jessica and Guardian. Fundraisers grew into foundations, and grassroots efforts fed into legislative change. More land was protected, more rangers trained in empathy-based conservation, and more communities educated. Jessica, looking back over the years, realized how much had changed, not just the policies or protections, but hearts and minds. The fight for the Mustangs had become a fight for something larger, a new way of seeing the world, where humans and animals shared respect, where courage meant connection, and where every life was a guardian of the wild. On quiet evenings, she still walked the trails near the ravine, often with Lily by her side. Together, they'd watch the herd roam beneath the setting sun, the silhouettes of horses dark against the glowing sky. "I think Guardian knew all along," Lily said once, "that we needed him as much as he needed us." Jessica nodded, feeling the truth in those words. The story they shared was a living legacy, one that would teach generations to come that miracles are born not from power or control, but from empathy, courage, and the willingness to listen across the boundaries of species. As stars filled the night sky, Jessica whispered a silent thanks to the wild stallion who had changed her life, and the lives of so many others. Years had passed since the stormy night when Jessica Carter first encountered Guardian at the edge of Devil's Ravine. Time, with its steady march, had transformed the park, and the people who called it home, in ways no one could have predicted. Jessica now stood on the steps of the park's headquarters, her eyes sweeping across the rolling plains where wild Mustangs ran free, their hooves pounding rhythms of freedom and survival. She was no longer just a ranger. She had risen to become the park supervisor, a position that came with burdens and blessings. But no title could measure the depth of the bond she still carried in her heart. The connection forged in mud, lightning, and sheer will between a woman and a wild stallion. Guardian's descendants roamed these lands, their coats shining under the sun, their spirits as untamed as the mountains themselves. Jessica watched them from afar, a quiet smile touching her lips. It was a testament to what could be achieved when trust was given, when empathy bridged the divide between species. Jessica's thoughts drifted to Lily, now a passionate wildlife student preparing for a future in conservation. They often walked together near the old ravine, tracing the paths where history had been made. Lily's eyes sparkled with the same fierce determination Jessica had once seen, and Jessica knew that the legacy was in good hands. The story of their journey, the rescue, the battles with poachers, the quiet moments of healing, had grown beyond the confines of Yellowstone. It had become a beacon, shining light on the possibility of harmony between humans and the wild. Documentaries, books, school programs, and Guardians' Day celebrations had woven the tale into the fabric of American conservation. But beyond the accolades and public recognition, Jessica understood that the real miracle lay in the transformation that had taken place within herself and those around her. She thought back to that first night, the thunder cracking, the mud slipping beneath her boots, the faint cry of a child trapped below. She remembered the wild eyes of Guardian, fierce and urgent, and the quiet trust that had blossomed between them in the darkest moments. It wasn't just about saving a life, she mused aloud, her voice barely above the whispering wind. It was about learning to listen. The wilderness had been her home since childhood, but now she saw it through new eyes. The boundaries between human and animal, between caretaker and wild creature, had blurred. Each life, be it human or Mustang, held lessons about courage, humility, and the delicate threads of connection that bind us all. Jessica knelt on the grass and touched a wildflower swaying in the breeze. "Nature's greatest teachers," she said softly, "are those who cross the boundaries of fear and species." She knew that every act of compassion, no matter how small, left a lasting legacy, one that rippled through generations, inspiring others to protect, to respect, and to hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Jessica and Lily stood side by side, watching Guardian's herd gallop freely across the plains. The stallion's silhouette was a symbol not just of survival, but of partnership, trust, and the enduring power of empathy. "Do you think he knows what he started?" Lily asked, her voice filled with wonder. Jessica smiled, feeling the weight of years and the lightness of possibility. "I think he knows," she replied, "that every life can become a guardian, and that every act of courage and compassion shapes the world in ways we can't always see." Together, they turned toward the ranger station, hearts full of hope and a shared commitment to the wild lands they loved. The legacy of Guardian and the bond between human and horse would live on, not just in stories or celebrations, but in the spirit of every person who dared to listen, to trust, and to protect. Because true miracles are born from empathy, courage, and the willingness to act. And in that, the wild and human worlds were forever entwined.